Well, Director Apollo, I know we're a minute early and we just turned, so I'll let you proceed. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. So I will note the start time is 8 a.m. sharp. I'd like to quickly confirm that on the Zoom call, we are live and out of the practice room, which looks like the case. We are recording, the transcript is running, and closed captions are activated. Thank you, Mr. Erickson. Mr. Chairman, would you like me to perform a roll call for quorum?
Sure.
Thank you. Commissioner Racines?
Commissioner.
Commissioner Racines? Thank you.
Are you really here? No.
Commissioner Wallace?
You might want your mic on.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Meyer?
Here.
Commissioner Pope?
Excused?
Pardon, I
Or
do see his
may-
hand is raised. Mr. Erickson, can you check, make sure he has speaker privileges? There we go.
Oh, there he is. Okay. Hand is raised, so that must mean he's there.
Present, thank you. Commissioner Naves?
Present.
Commissioner Reville?
Here.
Chairman Gordon?
Here.
We have a quorum, thank you. So 2 quick notes from my side as we get started. First is for attendees, there is a sign-up sheet in the back of the room, which we would appreciate that you would fill out if you are here and present. And as a quick disclaimer that I read off before these discussions, any decisions pertaining to the Wyoming Stable Token Initiative will be made by the commissioners of the Stable Token Commission or the state legislature in public meetings such as this. These decisions will be made known through our website or Twitter account or analogous platforms of other state entities and should be considered the only source of factual information. In terms of today's discussion, we will have a shorter and truncated 1-hour meeting today to accommodate your calendar. And with that, we quickly just get into the agenda and review that, make sure everyone's comfortable with it and move forward from there.
Very good. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first things first, we will look at the monthly budget review. So we have our monthly budget summary and detail files. We'll then go into the stable token industry update that I provide on a monthly basis. I'll provide a recap of yesterday's presentation to the Joint Appropriations Committee and discuss some of the next steps coming out of that. We'll provide an update on what I call the procurement status, so the status of the request for information that is currently ongoing. We'll discuss some next steps and we'll get some feedback on the commission about how those should take shape. We'll move into public comment, which will be limited to 3 minutes per speaking party, and then we'll wrap. So again, shorter than usual, and I do not believe we'll be taking any particular votes or actions at this time, although of course that may change as we move forward with the discussion. Any questions on today's agenda?
Any questions from commissioners? Hearing none. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Proceeding into the monthly budget review. So in your packet and in the Drive file that the commissioners have access to, you'll see a file titled Monthly Budget Summary. And then there's monthly budget details. So the summary tab, summary file, is what was created in response to the commission's desire to have some high-level visibility into where money was being spent every month. As of 12/31, this is the file you have in front of you. December was a fairly lean month. How that manifested was essentially my salary and benefits plus some business cards in the supplies category. So really not much activity there in December. We are still under $135,000 of spend for the agency out of the $500,000 allocated as of year-end, calendar year-end 2023. There are a few expenses that we are anticipating to hit in January. Those would be travel reimbursements for Commissioners Reville and Commissioners Naves. And I'm already working with A&I to perform those reimbursements. And then on my side, I expect some reimbursements under $150 for some software as a service fees, including Notion, Twitter, and OpenAI. So that is the high level detail. Any questions on that?
Questions from the commission? Questions? I hear none. Thank you, Anthony. Please
Thank you,
proceed.
Mr. Chairman. Moving forward. The detail file, to quickly go over, is the one that's a little bit harder to read. But I want to point out a few things that came up as in discussion as this was presented to the JAC. I want to be very specific. Feedback we received on this was not from the Joint Appropriations Committee, but from an observer who was also reviewing some of the documents. A little bit of context first. When the Stable Token Agency was formed, the $500,000 allocated to the Stable Token Committee, was put in what's called Series 600, which is intended for grants. It was put there as kind of a catch-all bucket to be allocated appropriately as the STC got stood up, and we figured out where that money had to go and allocated it accordingly. So to date, what the administration information team has been doing is kind of gradually allocating funds and capital out of grants to the appropriate series classifications as we move forward. However, that's resulted in a little bit of funky math at this point. If you were to look at the surplus or shortfall category for the 100 series, you'd see that we were actually showing a $87,000 shortfall, which is simply not the case. So what I'm going to do is work with the A&I team, who I've already identified this with, to make sure we can reclassify some of these historic expenses appropriately, and then project out the rest of the expenses and classify the rest of the expenses through the end of the 2024 fiscal year, which again ends June 30th of 2024. Again, it's a lot of preamble to say. There was a certain way this was set up and classified from the get-go because there was a lot of questions about how funding would be allocated. Now that we know, let's do that appropriately, because when we shift into the biennial budget for 2025, 2026, all funding that we will be getting from the general fund, hopefully, will be allocated very specifically. And we want to make sure we lead into that appropriately and our accounting is done right ahead of that time. So that's the context there. Are there any questions on that?
Questions? Comments? Anthony, I appreciate the explanation. I think it helps. And then obviously starting up there are a couple of things that are going to be needed to be moved. So I appreciate your work on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last thing I will mention in terms of review and approvals, typically we discuss the minutes here. I'll have the minutes for our previous conversation. That would be meeting number 9, held on December 21st, as well as the meetings from this discussion at our next meeting in February when we have a little bit more time, and we'll go through those then.
Okay, and Anthony, on that point, you know, we do record these Zoom meetings. Do we have a repository for those as well?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. All files related to the operations of this commission are on our website at stabletoken.wyo.gov. I've organized it by type, so you could find meetings, recordings by meeting. I've also shown it and illustrated it as by meeting as well. So if you were looking for the recording and the agenda and the public notice for meeting number 3, that's there. If you wanted to see all of our recordings in one spot, that's also available.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on to the stable token industry update. Again, not trying to turn this too much into a newsroom, but things are, as usual, moving very quickly. Again, some of the things we'll be discussing are from the last 72 hours in terms of developments, but to break this down first, we'll go into some domestic updates. On the 16th, the Federal Reserve put out a new paper called A Field Guide to Monetary Policy Implementation Issues in a New World with CBDC, Stablecoin, and Narrow Banks. I haven't candidly gone through the whole thing in detail. It's over 100 pages. But it does essentially assess the impact of CBDCs, stable tokens, and novel bank activities on existing financial infrastructure, particularly in the US. And I should also mention anything that we talk about here is also hosted on our website. We have a news and research page, and all of this content is linked. So that paper is there, and I will go through that in more detail between now and our next discussion. Secondly, when we met last month, one of the topics that had just come up was the ratings for stable tokens that was put out by Standard & Poor's. They held a webinar recently that walked through their determinations in detail, how they derived all their findings. That is also on our website for your perusal. And then again, this is another one from yesterday. The IRS and Treasury Department postponed the requirements for persons or businesses receiving $10,000 in one transaction or one or more related transactions to report said transaction if that transaction occurred using digital assets. This is part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In the IRS code, it is classified as 6050I, I believe. Essentially, what this was going to create was a need for people using digital assets to do a significant amount of reporting around large cash transactions. And that was put forth by the IRS and the Treasury. It's not going to go into effect until there is more of a formal regulation in place rather than the proposal. Last piece of news on the domestic side. This is not so much stable token related, but it is certainly regulator related. The SEC Twitter account was compromised when I believe it was Monday, ahead of Bitcoin ETFs being approved. So the SEC Twitter account was compromised, said Bitcoin ETFs are approved, caused the price of Bitcoin to spike by several $1,000s. Then when they revealed 30 minutes later that it was a fake tweet, the price of Bitcoin crashed by several $1,000s. Liquidations on the shorts, liquidations on the longs. So this was a multi-billion-dollar liquidation event because of essentially one SEC employee, as far as we know now, not having two-factor authentication set up on their phone. So this is germane to us because we need to consistently be thinking about cybersecurity. That's when that came up in our JAC conversation. We started talking about a chief information security officer and what that role would be. But these, again, I want to point out that there is an enhanced need for rigor here when it comes to making sure our T's are crossed and I's are dotted online. Any questions on the domestic news front?
Questions? Questions? Any colored comment? I don't see any hands, so yeah, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to some of our international news. So again, just in terms of scope and scale and comparisons here, the European Central Bank put out a series of 5 requests for proposals to build its digital euro. And in terms of the dollar amount offered between those 5 RFPs, to put that all together, they're offering $1.2 billion to build that. So I think our ask to the JAC of 5.8 million is pretty relative to that. But that is out there and that is live now. And that, you know, they've got a pretty long tail on their RFPs. I think it's a 2025 award, if I remember correctly. So we would be looking to move much quicker than that. But again, that's the scope that some of these other countries or coalitions are thinking through. I'd also mention that the digital rupee in India is now seeing over 1 million transactions per day. So again, we are seeing stable tokens and CBDCs pop up and receive utilization abroad. Any questions on either of those?
Questions? Nope.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, a little on Tether. I noticed that we didn't really discuss that as a use case as far as some of the our token displacing some of the Tether token yesterday. So, but I'm assuming that's still something that won't happen maybe in 24, 25, but probably after that. But I'm not sure where Tether comes into our use cases. I guess it's a little clarity.
So through the chair, thank you for the question, Commissioner Meyer. One of the things that's interesting, actually, it's one of my updates on the incumbent side of things, is that Tether's so the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, which manages Tether's reserve or a majority of Tether's reserves, has said as of this week at Davos that they have the money in reserves. However, they've still not passed an audit, right? So it's an interesting question about the transparency and the substantiation of Tether's reserves. You know, they received a 4 out of 5 in the S&P ratings for what that's worth, you know, where 1 is the best and 5 is the least trustworthy, is how I would present that. So there's still a lot of questions about Tether, but it is also the stable token that's growing the most, especially overseas in Asia. So I'm continuing to monitor it. It's an interesting question of how things will play out there. And I think that's kind of a wait and see approach from our perspective.
Very good.
Also quickly noting for the other incumbents we're typically tracking, so Circle privately filed an S1 report. So they do intend to go public, although the details are not going to be known until that S1 becomes public as well. And then PayPal, their stable token PYUSD, has seen a 70% growth in market cap over the last month. So they started out with $40 million in circulation in August of last year. They're now at about $300 million in January. So they're growing pretty substantially. There's a little bit more research for me to do there in terms of how that growth manifested. I do believe some of it was by moving on to different chains. And I think some of it was due to engaging market makers as well to help with the liquidity of the token. I do know they're on more exchanges now, and that's bolstered some of it. But I do need to do a bit of an analysis between where their jumps are in market cap and when those events happened. That is my news update for the time being. Any other questions on any of that? Any on the call?
Questions, comments, color? I hear none. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Continuing to move forward here, now walking through the Joint Appropriations Committee recap. So I'm going to first and foremost thank everyone who helped with the documentation for that. We got a lot done over the holiday period and through some changing timelines. So again, thank you very much for the support. I think most of you are familiar with the documents that were provided, but I also want to make sure that, because again, it was the holidays, that we quickly just recap what was submitted. And there is one file that was not public that substantiates some of our numbers. It does have vendor information on it. So I want to quickly flip through these and then provide a little bit of color how yesterday's discussion went, and we'll go from there. So the first thing you have in front of you in terms of the packet that's bound with the paperclip is the what we call the agency letter. This is pretty much the narrative on how we got to where we are now with the Stable Token Commission. So the first page is just a summary, essentially our ask of $5.8 million for the biennial budget for 2025, 2026. And a couple key things here. One is, of course, we expect and intend to return all capital provided by the general fund using the investment income generated by the underlying reserves of the stable token. So similar to the way the act is currently structured, where it says we have an initial allocation of $500K and we're going to pay that back, we would expect the same to happen with any additional funds that are allocated to us. And we try to position ourselves as an opportunity for Wyoming to create a supplemental and diversified income stream, fortify the state's position as a leader in cryptocurrency, blockchain, digital assets, and also take on a privacy-conscious role for a stable token while we are tracking other stable token issuances and CBDCs. To quickly flip the rest of this, because I think some of this is familiar, we provide background about Wyoming's work to date in the space and the broader stable token industry. We provide context about the landscape of both stable coins and CBDCs domestically and abroad. We walk through a bit of a timeline of our progress to date, including some of the work we've done around the business plan, the website, my letter to the state legislature, and then where we are with the RFI and RFP processes. We talk about funding, specifically how small our ask is in relationship to how much money has been raised by private incumbents in the industry, over 1.1 billion for Circle, under $500 million for Paxos, for example. And again, referring to that European Central Bank proposal. And we talk a little bit about how that funding would break down upon receipt. The revenue section gives kind of a back of the envelope calculation about how much money could be generated using a stable token, particularly in a high interest rate environment. And we talk about the market caps of existing stable tokens in the US, like USDC and PYUSD. We highlight the repayment terms and again, commit to repaying the money we're taking out of the general fund. And then we conclude. So that is the agency letter. And now make sure we've all seen it. So moving on from that, there's another file. This is the 600-900 series report. This is the one that has all of 4 lines on it. This is essentially to say we haven't really spent all that much money between the beginning of our operations and where we are now. Essentially, this is just the 900 series is for professional services, so vendors go into that bucket. You'll see the amount we've paid out to Paul Hastings for their consulting services. Beyond that, there's really not much here. And this is, again, a subset of what's in the broader budget that we reviewed a few moments ago. And then the last piece that was delivered publicly, and it's on our website, delivered to the JAC, is the exception request. The format of this, I tried to approximate as best as we could to the biennial budget reports that get sent to the JAC. We don't have access to the IBARS system that generates that, nor is our agency set up in that system because we are so new. We are working to get that done as we speak. But this essentially breaks down the $5.8 million budget ask by object code. So you can see that there are salaries, there's office supplies, and there's professional services. The mental model I have here is about 1/3 of this would be for FTEs internal to the commission, and about 2/3 would be for professional services for the development, issuance, and ongoing maintenance of the stable token. So we provide some context on this form as well, but really what that leads into is the longer piece of paper that's color-coded that you have in front of you. And for those online, I believe this is referred to as, it might be 2 files online. I believe it's budget projections is one, and then 900 series is the other. So again, this one's confidential because it does contain vendor information. But the budget projections, I put these together with the A&I team. I'd like to personally thank Rory Horsley for all of her assistance with helping me get this together, as well as the HRD team for helping with classifications of the FTEs. But essentially what we have here is 5 full-time positions, the executive director, which is my current role, and administrative positions. This would be someone like a program or project manager who could help as a second in command as the commission's operations continue to scale and grow. An accounting manager, which would be analogous to an internal CFO role, as we need to make sure we're tracking all of the monetary flows for the stable token. Then we have the chief risk officer and the chief security officer on here as well. Those roles are reflective of what is currently called out in the V3 business plan that we have. So those would be the internal roles. And again, we have laptops and keyboards and desks for everybody and software and all of that. The big chunk here is the 900 series, the professional services contracts. So again, flipping over on the physical sheet of paper or looking at the 900 series form online, you'll see here that I've broken this out by the 27 functions that we've proposed in the RFI, broken out by the 4 verticals of which they are categorized. I've taken some of the bids that, or not bids, I want to make sure I'm using the appropriate language here, some of the estimated costs of vendor services that have been provided through the RFIs and peppered them in here for a 24-month deployment or a 2-year deployment, depending on how the costs were proposed. And you could see how all of this works out. If you have any questions specifically on some of these, I would ask that they come to me either one-to-one or be done in a private session, because again, there are potential vendor names on here, but this is the context which substantiates the $3.7-ish million ask for vendor services. I will quickly call out, there's still 2 kind of TBDs. One of those is insurance. It's not clear how a policy would shake out. I had one very interesting conversation with an insurance provider about some of the complicated actuarial math that would be required for us to have a custom policy. It would be dependent on who our customers are, the blockchains we're on, the node infrastructure and decentralization of those blockchains, and there's quite a rabbit hole that goes down. So there's more to come on that side. And there's also audit services. So we've spoken to a number of auditors for the reserves. However, they're not really comfortable giving us any kind of concrete quote until we have an idea of how many third parties we may be working with that they would actually need to audit or receive attestations from. So that one's a bit of a placeholder for now, but I've given it a bit of a financial buffer. in that capacity. So that is where we are on some of those materials. Before moving on, I will pause for any questions. Again, I will be super specific. If there are questions on some of the numbers in the 900 series report, I would ask those come in either anonymized or in this conversation or directly to me afterwards.
Sure. Thank you, Director. First off, congratulations, good work in front of JAC. And with that, are there any questions, comments, issues? Seeing none, I also appreciate, I think, Anthony, the issue that insurance will have to be further explored, and it looks like the audit services that you've mentioned as well. That's sort of a moving target. Do you have any idea how quickly those come into focus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the insurance side of things, I don't have a good answer for that right now because we are working on a novel product that's never existed. And as such, to figure out how we would engage an insurance broker for that, it's not clear to me. That being said, I am interested to figure out some other ways around that. For example, all of the potential contracts that we may have in the future would go through our Attorney General's office. And those typically include a requirement of insurance on the vendor side. So if we have vendors that have their own insurance, they're the ones that happen to break for whatever reason, there would be some coverage there. I also was speaking to a member of A&I who mentioned we may also have our own, at least partial coverage as a agency that is kind of de facto granted to agencies of the Wyoming state government. So I'm exploring that as well. And then there is a very interesting possibility here. I don't think we'd go this route, but there are, if we wanted to have a kind of optional policy for the end user, there is a potential to have something akin to when you book a flight and you have the ability, or book a concert, have the ability to kind of insure your purchase. That also came up as a potential possibility. I don't love the connotation that has, which is like, this is complicated, you might lose your stuff. But again, it is just an option. We are exploring all options in all these capacities.
Yeah. Okay.
To quickly double back to your question about the audit services, I think we'll speak more in a few moments on some of the, what I'm referring to now at a high level as definitional work we need to do about the stable token and how we're rolling it out. And then once we have that in better focus, I think we would be prepared to have, when we perform the RFPs, we would have an idea of what we want to present to potential auditors, of how large the scope will be and what particularly will need to be audited.
Very good. Thanks. All right. With that,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that's all the documentation for JAC. I do quickly want to recap the presentation itself, and thank you to all of those who tuned in or joined in support. The recording is already on our site. The legislature does broadcast all of those live and in real time. So that is, if you want to see a replay of it, that's on our website as well. I would characterize the conversation as going well. Essentially, I provided the narrative and then spent most of the time on Q&A. Net, the budget, and I put this in a bit of air quotes, passed with a 7-5 vote. So what that means, if I'm understanding correctly, is that our budget ask is now in the JAC's budget bill, which is a great step in the right direction. However, it's not the last step. There are several more steps. So one is JAC continues to work the budget. So I believe that last conversation they have on the schedule is happening now as we speak. So they may have feedback coming out of that conversation. Secondly, they have a session known as round robin. So they, during that period of time, to go agency by agency and may just come up with questions, comments. They may decide to slice some digits off of a budget. I guess they could hypothetically add some numbers to a budget, but I would have to imagine it doesn't happen quite frequently. So there will be this round robin as well. And then after all of that, we still have to head into the actual legislative budget session beginning on February 12th, where these hearings will happen and it'll go to a formal floor vote. So we still have some work to do. But again, this is a good, great, positive step. And in terms of what comes next, outside of the procedural elements, I think feedback from some of the members of the JAC who voted against this, there's the obvious feedback of, well, it's money coming out of the coffers, right? So we would like to see a lower number, but that's kind of the default position. Again, I do think there is, in addition to that, a need for a bit more education on not so much the budget side, which we put forth, but the revenue model, right, which we currently have in flight. And that's something that's kind of next on the docket for us as well. So all that to say is I expect and intend to continue working on documents that will get the legislature more comfortable with what it is we're building, make sure they understand what it is we're building, and do that in a way that makes sure we're not perceived as lobbying, because I do know that is a concern. As the executive director, I'm not able to lobby any of the legislature members, but I do want to make sure they have the latest and greatest information about how we're structuring this. Any questions on next steps?
Questions? Hearing none. No. Good job yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on beyond JAC to the procurement status. I am working on an updated version of that contact list. You don't have it in your packets today. I will send that virtually by end of day tomorrow. With the JAC moving around, I had to push that out. But we've now reached out to almost 250 people on that list. And there are still new intros coming in, including and up to, as I was walking into this discussion, with fairly large potential service providers that could be interested in what we're doing or are interested in what we're doing. I'd also mention that I've received a bit more context on community bank relationships from both the Treasurer's Office and from the Division of Banking. So that will be part of the discussions in the next kind of month for me, is making sure we've reached out to all those organizations and at a minimum introduced ourselves and what it is we're building, and again, explore ways for us to collaborate with those organizations. If there are any specific questions on the RFI itself, happy to take them, but at this point in time, it's pretty much an extension of the work we've been doing, which is find out who's got what available and get them into the public purchase portal pipeline to make sure that they see the RFPs when those are live. Any questions?
Questions? None. Good. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this last section here, in terms of next steps, might be a bit more a free form, or at least would like to get a little bit more insight from the commission. But to quickly highlight what I think needs to happen in the next month, a lot of it will be framed with the RFP deadline that we have given ourselves, which is we want RFPs. So the RFI period we currently have open is expected to end on March 4th. We expect to open the RFPs on March 22nd after our third commission meeting of the year, which I believe is like March 18th. We want to make sure that those are structured in a comprehensive, consolidated way. We have, as we mentioned before, we have 27 different functions we're looking at to build a stable token out across those 4 verticals of finance, tech, legal, and operations. I do not think we can support 27 separate RFPs because if at scale, once you start multiplying out how many people will respond and the evaluation committee of 5 or more people each, the math just doesn't work. And I do believe at this point in time, we can consolidate a lot of functionality into a smaller number of RFPs. Some of them will certainly be standalone. So for example, audit or perhaps blockchain analytics would be independent functions. But we do feel that, let's say, some of the financial services, so back office accounting, middle office accounting, if we intend to outsource those, could be consolidated, as well as a number of different pieces of the tech stack. So digital wallets, issuing tokens, exchanges, those could potentially be bundled up. And we'll see how that all manifests. Again, that's all very much in flight. But the point is, those will be robust documents, and I don't want those to appear on your desks first thing on March 18th with the expectation we're getting those live on March 22nd. So that we want to make sure there's a bit of buffer of time here to build those out appropriately. And that'll also require engagement from multiple different agencies. So not only the commission, but A&I needs insight into those, ETS needs insight into those, and the Attorney General's office will also have insight into those to make sure not only we're going through the right processes, but things are structured appropriately and we're getting the information we need. So that is a big piece of what we're doing. In terms of what goes into the RFPs, I think that will be informed by the revenue model, the legal structure we determine, And again, the business plan update, which Commissioner Wallace, I know you asked for in the last discussion, again, is very much front and center, I think, for this next month's phase of work. In terms of the revenue model, to kind of double down on that one, I began working on this over the holidays before having to pivot to more the budget side for JAC. What I will be working on in tandem with the Treasurer's Office and some of the commissioners is a couple of things. First is the variables that we need to figure out for this, like how the growth, what is the growth factor we expect this to have, and how is that going to be determined with, which markets we're moving into. And again, we're pulling some data from things like the growth of PayPal stable token to inform that. From the STO's role, the expectation there is we would work with your office to figure out what the blended interest rate we should be using is over, let's say, a 5-year time horizon. And what that means is we know that when dollars come in to purchase stable tokens, those dollars will be invested in a blend of cash, U.S. Treasury securities with a year or less to maturity, and then repurchase agreements of U.S. Treasuries with 30 days or less to maturity. We need to figure out what that weight is. I'm not the expert here. Your office is. So we'll work with them on that. And then also I want to make sure we come up with what I'm referring to now as a decay function. We already know that the Federal Reserve has alluded to interest rates falling. I think they've mentioned 3 different cuts over the next year, or this year, rather. So we'll need to project out what we think that is and then what impact that's going to have on that blended rate that we come up with. So variables on top of variables, we're starting to hack away at those and make some determinations that are obviously informed by the data that we have. And then, of course, just from a P&L perspective, Commissioner Pope has been putting in a decent amount of work on that structure, and we'll kind of use that as the skeleton to layer on some of this other context. So that is the revenue model that we're looking to build out. Any questions on that?
Questions? Hearing none, no, that sounds good. Thank you, Commissioner Pope, for your work on that.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on to the legal structure, which again I will define as definitional work we need to do. We're at a point in conversations with potential vendors now that they've got very specific and targeted questions about how we're going to structure this issuance. And for the time being, everything we've been able to say, and it is true that everything is open for discussion. We don't have any particular determinations. However, as we move into formal RFPs, we're going to need to have a concrete model for which those potential vendors to respond to. And I think this is the juncture at which we need to start making some of these determinations and being more explicit about how we're structuring things. So Commissioner Naves and I have spoken to the Attorney General's office about some of this work. We'll work with Paul Hastings on that as well. And one of the ways that may manifest is myself working with all members of the commission on a shared document or some version thereof to make sure that we are answering questions accurately and we are informing the public of how we're looking to put this all together. Why do we believe we're not a security token? Why do we believe we're not a currency? We should have a rationale for all of that, and we should be aligned on all of that and have that be publicly facing. So that's another kind of big piece of, I think, the next month's worth of work. And again, that is, and that will feed into the RFPs. Are there any questions on that?
Any questions?
Yes,
Treasurer.
I guess Paul Hastings, I'm assuming he has some, I guess, people that are experts in the accounting industry that would probably guide some of his recommendations, because I think a lot of that is going to be some things that has to be determined, by accountants and not necessarily lawyers. So that's the one thing that I hope that if there's any decisions that has to be made by accountants, that we have what we think it is, and then we actually make sure that either through Hastings or through contract with a top 4 or 5 accounting firm, we actually get a definitive answer on something. So just so we're not going down the wrong road.
Through the chair, thank you, Commissioner Meyer. So to quickly respond to that, and Commissioner Naves, I do see you have your hand up. I'll acknowledge that in a second. To quickly respond, I think we need to avail ourselves of all sources of information, right? If you recall from our December meeting, again, the day before we had that discussion, Commissioner Pope had called out the AICPA now has new guidance on digital assets. FASB now has new guidance on digital assets. So we may have to look at historical data and case law for some things. We may need to look at GASB for some things. We may need to look at emerging legislation or emerging frameworks for guidance as well. And we'll need to avail ourselves of all sources. We need to be careful about that to make sure that we are, having these discussions amongst ourselves and make sure we don't create a quorum in doing that. So we'll need to figure out how to operationalize that the most efficiently. But yes, I think that's the long answer to your short question, which is we'll make sure we talk to everyone we can.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I like, basically an opinion letter from somebody that's got E&O insurance. Okay.
Hey, Ms. Treasurer, Commissioner Naves.
Thank you, Governor. Kurt, to answer your question directly, in my prior engagements with Paul Hastings in the past, while I was in the private industry, to my knowledge, they do not have accountants on staff because they are just a law firm, so they don't provide accounting services to their clients. They do have tax attorneys on staff, which could be of support to us. However, any accounting decisions, classification decisions, or anything like that, they would be asking us as their client to speak to the experts. So to Anthony's point, potentially engaged a separate firm to be able to provide this guidance. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Director, it seems to me that in one of our upcoming commission meetings, we may want to sort of flesh out some of these as much as we can, a little bit more as they become more clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fully agreed. Again, I think we'll need to think about how that information is best manifested. Is it, I think we figure out what the endpoint should be and work backwards from there. Perhaps, again, an FAQ on our website of how we're thinking about things. Perhaps we break out pages on the website of, here's legal, here's financial, here's technical, and we map it to kind of our, the functions we put forth and say, here's what we want with more determination. We'll need to figure out how to put the meat on the bones appropriately. But I think we'll figure out we'll put a couple, I will take the initiative to put a couple of those together as, let's say, mock-ups. I think we could work backwards from there to again, put the meat on the skeleton.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any other questions on some of the work that's in front of us for the next month?
Questions? No.
Okay. There's no real other items from my side for this discussion. I know we're keeping it to an hour or less today, and we are just about the 45-minute mark. I'll quickly mention in terms of upcoming meetings, the next meeting of the Stable Token Commission is expected to happen on February 15th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. in this room, the Wyoming Capitol Auditorium. Will also be available over Zoom. And again, that will be a little bit more robust with some of the documentation we've just talked about. I'd also mention that the 2024 legislative budget session does convene on February 12th. I do believe that has about a month of duration to it. And I'm assuming I will be seeing some of you while I run around the Capitol like a crazy person from time to make sure everything is in order from the perspective of the Stable Token Commission. Before we move into public comment, which again, we've limited to 3 minutes per speaking party, are there any other topics from the commission that you'd like to bring up, questions you'd like me to address, or perhaps any initiative you'd like me to take over the coming month that was not discussed today?
Questions, comments? Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question as far as kind of some of the legal advice that we're getting. And I guess I'm wondering how much work they're doing as far as reviewing any, I guess what I'd call regulatory threats versus rather than, just looking at it as whether this is a security or not. Are they looking at any regulatory threats that could, Department of Treasury or something like that that could threaten this token?
Through the chair. Thank you, Commissioner Wallace. So we did engage, to be very candid, we did engage them specifically on the securities piece of it. However, they can help us look around some corners in that capacity. The reason why I think this definitional work for us to do is important because the more we define, the more we can have a response to. If we continue to be somewhat amorphous about how we're moving forward and how we're structuring this, it's going to be hard for them to give us any direction one way or the other. And I think one of the things that'll be most important is, as we define this more and more, we will find how we can best, how I should phrase this. As we define it more, we'll find out where we get the most value add from Wyoming's status as a state, right? As a sovereign fund, perhaps. There's going to be things that they'll need to respond to specifically. And I think the more that we put out there specifically, the more they'll be able to kind of opine on.
Thanks. Further questions, comments? Director Apollo, I think we're moving at pace. We're kind of at that point where things are starting to gel, and you have done a great job of anticipating what's necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not see any questions from Commissioner Navas, Commissioner Pope. Mr. Erickson, can you let me know if Commissioner Reville is still on the line? I don't know if he's.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Commissioner Reville, any questions or comments from your side?
None, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So with that being said, I would move that we move into public comment period here.
Just before we do.
Sure.
Yep.
The one thing that I noticed in JAC that a couple, three actually, folks wanted to know more about a more complete business plan. And I think as you fill in the blanks, and I think you gave them a good idea about why, we got to go through the RFI process, and once you actually get bids and you can actually fill in the expense side. And I think that was lost on some folks, as far as the chicken and egg concept of a complete business plan. But I think that, if we can have something together, during that, especially before the conference committee, that it's actually available. I think that's the last deadline you would have to have something that was, as descriptive as possible, and as straightforward as possible. So that kind of put that question to rest.
Through the chair. Thank you for the comment, Commissioner Meyer. I agreed. I think, again, that's one of the ways the information we need to collect and collate will manifest is through the business plan. Maybe also be elsewhere in like FAQs on our website, but it should be consolidated in the business plan. And certainly heard that feedback yesterday as well. Again, I'm not sure if certain members had seen the work that's already gone into it. I mean,
Right.
commissioners have done a lot of work already on that.
Oh, yeah.
And now we'll be kind of doubling back to it to make sure we're reinforcing it and refilling it with all the context we've been able to gather through the RFI process.
I just wanted you to know that, that the deadline really is before the conference committee. And that's probably just to kind of, you guys have done, a year and a half worth of work in a few months. So, but just to let you know where some of those deadlines go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you, Commissioner Meyer. Off the top of your head, would you know when the conference committee convenes?
What, the third week of February?
Yeah,
Somewhere in there.
it'll be towards the end of the session.
Yeah.
So it'll be after our next meeting.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So if it makes sense at this juncture, we'll move into public comment.
Sure.
And I would first invite anybody in the room who may have public comments. It's a little early today, so not quite as full of a house.
Is there anyone here who wishes to address the commission? Anyone here wishing to address the commission? Anyone present in the room today wishing to address the commission? Director, I don't see anyone, so we can move online.
We have
Mr.
Carrie
Erickson.
online.
So Carrie,
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Carrie reached out to me yesterday mentioning that they may or may not have microphone access. So I would ask that they let us know if they have microphone access and could speak, or if they wanted to submit a question via text or chat.
Brian, are they trying to chat?
I don't see anything coming through on the chat, and they have been allowed to speak.
Brian, I'm noticing the Q&A bubble down there has a notification on it. Would that be?
Carrie is asking if they can text and what phone number to send it to.
Looks like there's one notice. Can you pull it
Yeah.
up?
That's what it is. It's they're going to type their question, and as soon as they do, I'll read it out loud to you.
Okay, thank you. While Carrie is typing, is there anyone else on the line who may have a question?
Carrie asks, as JP Morgan has financed numerous activities of Jeffrey Epstein, an unreformed convicted pedophile, partnering with JP Morgan is a reputational risk for the state of Wyoming, the Wyoming stable token, and the people of Wyoming. And in fact, all big banks are reputational risks due to numerous lawsuits, charges, fines, and other scandals. How and when will this unacceptable risk be corrected?
Director, thank you for that. I don't know, Mr. Treasurer, if you.
I can tell you that the state of Wyoming didn't do any financing of that particular individual that we know of for sure.
Right.
It's in it. I guess JP Morgan is broken down in several different divisions. Any division that we work with, I think, are separate from the ones that those individuals worked with. So it's the problem that you have with anybody in industry, they all have bad actors within their ranks, and they're all worldwide organizations, and from time to time, every one of them ends up with a crook, and they end up with a reputational risk. I guess until we have banks that are located in Wyoming, that are Wyoming banks that are, have a multi-billion dollars worth of assets and enough collateral to handle the state's business, we're subject to that type of participation with some people that from time to time have bad actors. And that's not to say that there aren't bad actors that happen from time to time within the state of Wyoming. That's why we have a penitentiary. So, that's our society. We're not immune from bad actors. And I agree with you that the actions of Epstein and his clientele were reprehensible, and I think they're going to be punished if not in court, in the public opinion, and it's going to be good people like you that will draw attention to their ill deeds, and I thank you for your concern.
And Mr. Treasurer, if I can add, the Constitution of the state of Wyoming requires fully collateralized deposits. And while I wish that banks in Wyoming had that capacity, and we hope that eventually they do because we do have a better banking sector, the fact that this could swamp the entire banking system in Wyoming is a challenge for the state. And constitutionally, we have to work with either a state chartered bank or a national bank. And that limits our the number of people that we can store deposits with. But I do appreciate the comments and the practical situation. I think, Mr. Treasurer, when last we looked at a custodial bank, we were looking at maybe three alternatives that could take the capacity of the state. Those are things that are going to be challenging for the future. And for the asker of the question, Carrie, one issue that is really particularly important for Wyoming is that we are losing our state chartered banks. They're being purchased by out-of-state entities. We may need to consider what to do about that. But as far as the stable token piece goes, we'll make sure that we are adequately protected. Thank you.
As a second question. Unless I missed it, the commission has yet to provide even a rudimentary risk-benefit analysis for undertaking building the Wyoming stable token. This should have been one of the very first things performed and presented to the people of Wyoming and absolutely before this endeavor was undertaken. Similarly, I have found no list of risks or benefits for this endeavor. If the commission, the governor, and the state want the people of Wyoming to trust the Wyoming stable token, we must be presented with reasons to do so, as well as known and potential risks. Have these critical needs been filled? And if not, when can the people of Wyoming expect them to be?
And thank you again, Carrie. That discussion is a legislative discussion. The legislature asked us to proceed. Our approach here has been extremely cautious and thoughtful. If there are issues related to risks associated with that, those are the things that we are fully contemplating, and we'll proceed. And I appreciate your comments to the commission. They also should be directed to the legislature who passed the piece of legislation in the first place.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Erickson, I want to make sure, because we have a 3-minute limit for public comment, and then we've got about 4 minutes left. Is there anything else on the? Okay, excellent.
Thanks.
And in the, I guess the thing of risk is that one of the risks I think that I hope that we can avert with a Wyoming digital token would be to avert the possibilities that you would have with a national digital token, which would essentially nationalize, all of the currencies that we have, and put it into a position where the federal government and the IRS would know every potential or every purchase that you make, and essentially do away with cash and just have a digital token. And I think that's where they're headed. And we're hoping to have an alternative where, if that ever comes to fruition, an alternative where that you have a Wyoming digital current token that doesn't have that I guess aspect of invasion of all your privacy. So that's something that I think that as this moves forward, we can make sure that there's safeguards in there that your privacy is protected, where we can't do that with a national token. And so that to me, it's a good insurance policy from that aspect, as trying to remove a potential risk that some people think it's more likely than not. So from that aspect, I think that we need to move forward and protect the privacy of the folks in Wyoming.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With about 60 seconds on the clock, I think if you wanted to make a motion to adjourn, you can probably do that.
I would entertain a motion.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a support? It's been seconded. Commissioner Meyer, Commissioner Racinas, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, Mark, I believe that. As soon as you get a national thing there, by golly, I think that's why they're building all of that,